Hello, my name is Nessa McElwain. I'm a journalist and I'm just recording a few thoughts on the developing area of student accommodation for investors. So a couple of weeks ago, an organisation in Paris announced that it was going to build 370 little studio apartments for students near La Défense. There was no surprise about this because last year this organisation announced a €1 billion joint venture to develop student accommodation in Paris. And we're talking about an organisation that's going to be run by Grey Star Real Estate Partners. They're based in the US in Charleston in South Carolina. And when they launched this joint venture last year, they talked about what they were going to deliver, and these are high-class student apartments, top of the market, and they said that they will include amenities and services with a preference for locations with exposure to the Greater Paris public transport projects. This focus, it continued, is aligned with the shareholders' strategy in other major European cities, London, Berlin, Amsterdam and Vienna, focusing on hubs with stable employment and long-term persistent rental housing demand. So when big investors look for opportunities to invest their money, there are 4 different categories that they usually go for. The first is equities, that's shares. So that's buying shares in companies that are listed on stock exchanges usually. So that could be Total Energy, BNP Paribas, Marks and Spencer's, a long list. Or there's bonds, that's the second area. These are loans, normally to government or to companies. And then there's property, straightforward commercial property. That would have been warehouses traditionally or offices. And then there's a fourth area, which is alternative. And student accommodation is coming into this alternative area. It's a relatively new area. And it usually takes place now in big cities. So there's a lot been going on in Dublin in the last couple of years. Sheffield, for instance, that's got 2 or 3 universities. So investors aren't just dependent on one university doing well. New Delhi, India is a huge market. Sydney and the United States is where this whole market first started. And nearly all of these locations will have a strong middle class element in the population, families that want to send their children to university. So there was a lack of supply even 4 years ago. This is according to Savills, the international surveyors. They did a report and they were talking about how education was becoming much more globalised. So we were seeing large numbers of Chinese students going to the rest of the world, particularly to Europe and the United States. And of course, within the EU, there is the Erasmus scheme. So through the Erasmus scheme, we're seeing students from Paris, for instance, going to Dublin to study for a semester. Record amounts were being invested back 4 years ago. So in 2016, $16 billion was invested into this sector. We're not sure where we are now because of Covid and with more students studying through Zoom. And of course through Brexit, that's had a negative effect because the UK was a big market for Erasmus schemes in the past. A problem for families who are paying for students to go to university is, as I said a moment ago, that the developers of these projects are really pitching them at the high end. So you'll have very nice accommodation, but it's pricey, it costs a lot, and you'll often have shared canteens and gymnasium and other facilities. And so how do we decide whether to invest in areas like this or what the risks are? It's the same thing, investment appraisal, risk appraisal in some ways. One way of looking at whether an investment is worthwhile is to try to calculate, obviously, how much money it's going to produce and what it will be worth in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. The traditional way of doing that was net present value, known often by its initials NPV, and that's you calculate what the flows of cash will be, what will come in, what will go out. And this second way of doing it is called, it's scenario planning, looking at options. So you might think, I'm investing in Paris now, that's step one. If things go well, I might invest in Bordeaux. Or there's another way of scenario planning, and that's called gaming. This is the most modern approach out of these three that I'm just describing. And you would think there, okay, I'm investing in the Paris student accommodation market. If I do that, what will my rivals do? Supposing I invest there and 6 months later, 3 big rivals with much more money than me come into the market. If they wanted to, they could undercut me on the rates that I'm offering. So it's a very interesting time at the moment to be in this market, and we'll see how it changes over the next year or two.